I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto the dirt road and saw the glint of metal where there shouldn't be any. At first, I thought it was maybe a truck, maybe some construction crew working on the easement again. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped, my jaw clenched. It wasn't a truck, it was a fence, a brand new, shiny industrial-grade steel fence, wrapped around my entire ranch like some kind of cage. I hit the brakes so hard I kicked up a cloud of dust behind me. There it was, a full perimeter enclosure with one entrance, one gate. And right in the center of that gate, staring me in the face like a slap in the mouth, was a bright red sign. Private HOA property, no trespassing. I blinked, then blinked again. I had to be seeing it wrong. Was this a prank? A mistake? But no. The chain link was tight, the padlock was thick, and that sign was bolted in. I got out of my truck, walked up to the gate, and rattled it hard. It didn't budge, solid as bedrock. I just stood there for a second, staring through the fence at my own front porch, my barn in the distance, the longhorns grazing peacefully like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was locked out of my own land. I'd only been gone for 2 days. 2 days. Drove down to San Antonio to check in on my sister after her back surgery. She needed help lifting things, so I stayed the night. Didn't think twice about it. Left my tools in the shed. Didn't lock up the feed house. Didn't even think about my gate. Because it was my gate. My land. My ranch. But while I was gone, somebody made a move. And not just any somebody. I didn't need a detective to figure it out. There was only one group who'd been trying to push me out for months. Crystal Pines Estates HOA. Now, let me be clear. I don't live in an HOA. Never have, never would. My property's been independent since it was carved out of ranch land in the 1930s. When I bought it, the boundaries were clear, the deed was clean, and I paid cash. No mortgage, no liens, no associations. Just land. That's what I wanted, freedom. But about a year ago, this slick developer showed up and started turning the empty pastures next to me into a modern subdivision. They called it Crystal Pines Estates. Fancy name for a place with no trees and even fewer brains. Within a few months, the first row of houses popped up like mushrooms after rain. Then came the mailers, the HOA charter, and the parade of board members in khakis and name badges, acting like they ran the county. I didn't pay them any mind at first. They were on their land, and I was on mine. I figured they'd build their houses, plant their little shrubs, and leave me alone. But they didn't. The first letter came in a cream-colored envelope with gold trim. "Dear Mr. Riggins," it said, "your barn's exterior color does not conform with the visual harmony guidelines of Crystal Pines Estates." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Guidelines. Harmony. I wasn't even in their neighborhood. I threw the letter in the burn barrel and forgot about it. Then they sent another one. This time it was about equipment visibility. Apparently my tractor was detracting from the neighborhood's scenic appeal. Again, I'm not in their neighborhood. I'm on my own land, out here raising longhorns and fixing fences. I don't have time for people worrying about the aesthetic harmony of a working ranch. But they kept coming. Letters, emails, even a visit from a guy named Brent or Brett or some other soft name like that. Wore a pastel shirt, tucked in polo, and talked like he was interviewing me for a job I didn't want. "We're trying to create a cohesive visual identity for Crystal Pines," he said, like he was explaining fine art. I asked him if a rattlesnake bit his sense of direction, because he was about 2 acres too far west. That shut him up for a while. But the pressure didn't stop. I started noticing people walking the edge of my fence line, taking photos. Strangers with clipboards poking around the corners of my property, acting like they owned the place. I confronted one of them, and he mumbled something about easement evaluations, before scurrying off like a rat. I knew what was happening. They were looking for a way in. A loophole, a mistake, anything they could twist to make my ranch part of their little HOA utopia. But there wasn't one. My land was sealed tight by old deeds and county lines. I'd done my homework. Still, just to be sure, I drove to the county recorder's office and double-checked every inch of paper. Everything was clean. But while I was there, the guy behind the counter, old-timer with a gut and a 6-decade stare, leaned in and said, "If Crystal Pines is circling you, don't turn your back. They don't play fair." He was right. Because 2 days later I came home to find myself locked out of my own ranch like a squatter. They didn't block my driveway. They didn't touch my fence. What they did was worse. They bought the tiny sliver of land that touched the road, the only point of access to my property. It was just a 5-foot wide strip, shaped like a bent elbow, worthless on its own. But with it, they were able to build that gate, not across my driveway, but in front of it, on their land. Their little 5-foot patch of dirt now held the only entrance to my home, and they used it to shut me out. No warning, no notice. Just a fence, a padlock, and a sign telling me I didn't belong. I stood there for what felt like an hour, fists clenched, heart pounding in my ears. I could have called the sheriff, could have made a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I got back in my truck, turned it around slow, and drove into town. Not for revenge. Not yet. I had a better idea, because if Crystal Pines thought locking me out was their checkmate, they had no idea the game had just started. You know that feeling when you can sense the storm before it hits? Like the air gets thick still, and you just know something's coming. That's exactly how it felt, after I found myself locked out of my own land. The gate was the first shot, but the war had already been simmering under the surface. I could feel it. This wasn't about a fence or a patch of dirt. This was about control. Crystal Pines wasn't just trying to fence me out. They were trying to force me in. Into their world, their rules, their quiet little community where everyone matched and obeyed. And I was the stubborn splinter they couldn't pull out. Back at home, I sat on my porch, staring out at the silver gate barely visible through the tree line, just past the edge of my land. My dog Blue lay beside me, his ears twitching at every sound, same as mine. I wasn't sleeping much. My mind was running like a diesel engine. I couldn't shake the thought. How the hell did they even get that land? That little strip where they put the gate didn't exist on my deed, sure. But who did it belong to before? And why sell it now all of a sudden? Something about the timing felt too clean, too deliberate. So the next morning, I headed straight to the county land records office. Again. This time, not just to check my own property, but to dig deeper. I asked about the 5-foot strip at the entrance to my driveway. The clerk pulled up the parcel file, and sure enough, 2 weeks earlier, it had been sold. Quiet deal. No public announcement. Not even listed. Sold directly to the Crystal Pines HOA by a guy named Gerald Sandlin. And as luck would have it, or maybe fate, Gerald wasn't some big developer or corporation. He was a private landowner, owned a few oddball patches around the county, which meant if he sold one, maybe he still had others. So I called up Terence, my buddy who worked real estate around here, and owed me big for helping him out when his barn caught fire last summer. "Terry," I said, "I need you to find Gerald. And I need to know if he's holding anything else near that gate." Terence laughed, thought I was pulling some kind of revenge prank. I told him I wasn't in the mood. 2 days later, he called me back and said, "Mike, you're not going to believe this. Turns out Gerald had owned not one, but 2 narrow plots along the road leading into Crystal Pines. The HOA bought one, the sliver they used to install the gate, but the other, still unsold. It ran directly behind the gated entrance, wrapping around the corner and connecting straight to the county road. A wedge of land just wide enough to park a truck on. And that wasn't all. On that strip sat a small, beat-up maintenance shed left over from a long-gone utility project. No one had touched it in years, but according to Gerald's notes, the shed had once been used by road crews and still had a lockbox inside. I wired the money that day. No negotiating, no waiting. I bought that strip of land outright, with the shed and everything on it. That land gave me legal, documented access to the very gate that kept me out. And inside the shed, just like Gerald said, an old metal lockbox mounted to the wall. Inside it, taped to the back of the lid, was a single brass key, still labelled in faded marker. Gate 1. I held that key in my hand, and for the first time in days, I smiled. Now I could have gone down to the HOA office and waved it in their faces. Could have opened the gate in the middle of the night and reclaimed my driveway like a cowboy in a spaghetti western. But I didn't. I waited. I was patient. Because what I had now was bigger than revenge. I had leverage. The gate, the shed, the key. They weren't just symbols anymore. They were power. And Crystal Pines? They had no clue it was slipping out of their hands. I waited until Saturday. That's when I knew they'd all be gathered for their community event. Every month they held something. A cookout, lawn party, or family picnic. It was all part of their little utopia branding. I rolled up slow in my old Dodge, parked neatly on my new land, and stepped out carrying a wooden sign I had hand-painted myself. Bold red letters, white background, private property, no trespassing. I hammered that sign right into the ground while they watched from across the lawn, mouths open. It was like someone had dropped a skunk in their lemonade. Brent, or maybe it was Craig this time, came stomping over, huffing and puffing. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. I turned around slow and said, "Putting up a sign." "On my land." His eyes narrowed. "That's HOA-controlled land, sir. You can't just—" "Nope," I cut him off. "Check the deed. It's mine, as of 3 days ago." Then I pulled the key out of my pocket, dangled it in front of him, and slipped it back in. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Just silence. I walked right past him, unlocked the gate with a satisfying click, and stepped back onto my ranch without saying another word. Just me, blue, and a breeze that felt like victory. I didn't raise my voice, didn't break a thing. But every single person at that picnic saw what happened. The man they fenced out had just walked right through the gate and locked it behind him. There's a certain kind of silence that falls after you make your move. The kind that tells you you've hit a nerve so deep, the other side doesn't even know how to respond yet. That's the silence that wrapped around Crystal Pines after I walked through that gate. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I just unlocked it like it belonged to me, which it did, and walked through like I had every right in the world, which I absolutely did. It was a clean, quiet win. And the best part, I didn't have to say a word. The looks on their faces said it all. They weren't angry yet. No, they were confused, rattled, like their little plan had sprung a leak, and they didn't know where the water was coming from. For a couple days it was quiet. Too quiet. I knew they wouldn't let it go. People like that, they don't just roll over and admit defeat. Not when their whole reputation is built on control. So I spent those next few days doing what I do best, preparing, reinforcing the gates, checking my property lines again, updating my security system. I even added cameras to the barn and the west pasture. I wasn't paranoid. I was just playing smart, because I knew deep down they were already planning their next move. And sure enough, it came faster than I expected. It started one morning with the rumble of tires on gravel, way more tires than usual. I stepped out onto my porch, coffee in hand, and watched as a small convoy of SUVs, golf carts and sedans made their way up the road toward the same gate I had just walked through days earlier. I counted 5 vehicles. 5. For what? A conversation. They could have sent one person. But that's not how people like that operate. They don't talk. They stage. It was a performance. A show of force dressed up as a friendly visit. And leading the pack, of course, was my old pal Brent, now wearing a navy blazer like he was running for office. Beside him, a woman I didn't recognize stepped out in heels, sunglasses, and a folder under her arm. They didn't even knock. Just walked right up to the edge of my land and stood there like they were waiting for me to bow. I didn't move, just leaned on the post rail, sipping my coffee and waiting to hear what fresh nonsense they'd cooked up. Finally, Brent cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Riggins, we need to talk." I said nothing, just raised an eyebrow. The woman beside him stepped forward. "Beatrice Langford," she said, "legal counsel for Crystal Pines HOA." That's when she opened the folder and started pulling out papers like she was handing me a menu. "We're serving formal notice," she said. "You are currently in violation of multiple HOA zoning guidelines and are considered to be trespassing on community property." Now, I've heard a lot of things in my life. Some dumb, some strange. But this took the whole cake and the candles. I stared at her, then pointed behind me with my thumb. "That," I said, "is my barn. That's my field. And that porch you're staring at? That's where I drink my coffee every morning. So unless you think I'm trespassing on my own damn life, I'd suggest you take those papers and fold them into something useful." Brent stepped in again, trying to smooth it over. "Mike, it's not personal. Your ranch has been fully enclosed by our new perimeter, and as such, it has been temporarily designated as internal green space until the zoning board finalizes the reclassification." I actually laughed, not a chuckle, an honest-to-God belly laugh. "Green space?" I said. "This ain't a public park, Brent. It's a working ranch, and it sure as hell isn't yours." Beatrice didn't flinch. She pulled out a map, highlighted with color-coded lines and little arrows. "You see," she said, "according to our submitted documentation, this area, your area, has been brought into the HOA's long-term development plan. Once it's approved, you'll be subject to community standards." That was it. That was their move. They couldn't buy my land, so they decided to box it in and then claim it as part of their vision. Reclassify it, smother it under red tape until it choked. They were trying to legally wrap my ranch inside their development like a gift they hadn't earned, and they thought I'd just roll over and accept it. But what they didn't know was that I had fire in my blood, and a cousin who just happened to be one of the best damn land use attorneys in Texas. I didn't say another word, just pulled out my phone, dialed up Emma, and handed it to Brent. "You're going to want to hear this," I said. Emma didn't disappoint. Calm as ever, she introduced herself, then said something that made Brent's face go white. "You have exactly 3 minutes to vacate private property before I file for criminal trespass, harassment, and malicious zoning interference." Beatrice snatched the phone and tried to argue, but Emma wasn't having it. She rattled off case law and property code like a chainsaw. When she got to the part about unlawful enclosure, Beatrice's lips went thin, and she handed the phone back without another word. They left. Not in a hurry, but not slow either. The kind of walk that says they were hoping I didn't notice they just got smacked down. But I noticed. And more importantly, I knew what came next. Because now, it wasn't just a power struggle, it was a legal war. And if they thought I was going to sit on my porch and wait for the next letter, they had no idea who they'd picked a fight with. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared. I've been through scarier things than a bunch of HOA board members with too much printer ink and not enough spine. No, I didn't sleep because my mind wouldn't quit. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that smug little map they tried to show me. That color-coded fantasy, where my ranch was nothing more than a patch of community green space, a quiet little park for their yoga moms and dog walking groups. They were trying to erase me on paper like my land didn't matter because it didn't fit into their curated postcard lifestyle. But what they didn't realize is, folks like me, we're not ink on a page. We're carved into the ground. And when you try to dig us out, you better be ready for what comes up. The next day, I did what I always do when I'm wound too tight to think. I worked. Repaired a busted fence post, stacked fresh hay, cleaned the barn. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mind ran laps. Blue stuck close, like he knew I wasn't right. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed something off. A sound. Faint, but steady. The kind of rhythm you don't expect to hear unless someone's working. I followed it, circling to the north side of my land. And that's when I saw them. 3 men in orange vests, standing just outside my fence line, digging a trench like they were laying pipe. But it wasn't county workers. No markings, no permits posted. Just them, a couple of shovels, a folding table, and a rolled-up blueprint flapping in the wind. I called out. They froze. One dropped a walkie-talkie that crackled on impact, and I heard a voice on the other end say, "Keep digging. We need that secondary access by sunrise." That was all I needed to hear. They were building a back entrance, another point of control. Maybe even a service road to run straight through the ranch. Quiet, secret, illegal. I didn't waste time. Hauled back to the house, grabbed my drone, and launched it into the sky. Got full aerial footage, men working, the plans spread out, even one guy pointing at my land, like he was planning a future garden party on it. I zoomed in, caught faces. And just when I thought I had all I needed, a spotlight clicked on from somewhere down below. Then the sharp, metallic clack of a rifle bolt being chambered. I barely had time to react before a warning shot cracked through the air. Loud. Real. My drone jerked and dropped like a stone. I dove behind the hay bales, heart thumping so hard it echoed in my ears. Stayed low for almost an hour before sneaking back to recover what was left of the drone. The thing was busted, but the footage, already uploaded to the cloud. I'd been ready for that. I sent it all to Emma and to Sheriff Dean, my old buddy from high school, who now ran the local department. Dean called me 10 minutes later. "You know who they are?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but they just fired a gun over my land. That's not development. That's a threat." And just when I thought it couldn't get any more ridiculous, I came back from the feed store that afternoon to find a construction crew parked right at my main road. Not digging, paving. Fresh asphalt being laid in neat strips. Bright yellow lines painted clean down the middle. A massive sign planted at the entrance. "Coming soon. Crystal Pines North Entrance. Private HOA road. Authorized vehicles only." My stomach turned. They weren't just trying to trap me. They were literally building a road through my property without a single word of permission. And standing about 50 feet back, clipboard in hand, was Beatrice Langford, smiling like she'd just won a prize at the county fair. I didn't storm over. I didn't shout. I took it all in, turned around, and drove straight to town. Paid a visit to the one man who could shut it all down in under an hour, Barry McDougall, zoning inspector. Wore bolo ties and smelled like sawdust. I'd pulled him out of a collapsed shed during a storm a few years back. Saved his life, and he never forgot. When I showed him the drone footage, the trench, the illegal paving, his jaw clenched. "They didn't file a single permit," he said. "And if that road crosses your land, that's criminal trespass on top of illegal infrastructure development." I didn't need to say another word. He tossed his sunflower seeds, grabbed his clipboard, and told me he'd be on site by noon the next day. And true to his word, Barry rolled up in a dusty blue pickup, boots caked in old mud, measuring wheel in hand. He walked every inch of that illegal road, jotting notes, snapping photos, muttering under his breath. When two Crystal Pines security officers rolled up in a golf cart and tried to give him the runaround, Barry flashed his badge and told them they were about 3 seconds from being on the wrong side of a county commission ruling. They backed off, but I could see the look in their eyes. They weren't scared. They were stunned, like no one had ever told them no before. Barry shut the roadwork down on the spot, ordered every machine off the land, every contractor to cease operations until a formal review. Fines were coming. Legal action, probably worse. And still, I didn't feel safe. That night, I installed motion lights and stayed up with my shotgun across my lap. Just after midnight, the barn cameras went off. 2 men in hoodies, faces hidden, crept in with gas cans and matches. They poured accelerant on the hay. I called 911 while watching them live. They ran off when they saw the lights kick on, left behind a lighter and their footprints, clear as day. Dean reviewed the footage, said, "They wanted your barn to burn. Force you out. Make it look like an accident." It was all escalating. Fast. But I wasn't running. If they wanted to play with fire, they were going to learn what it felt like to get burned. And I was just getting started. You'd think after trying to dig into my land, shoot down my drone and burn my barn, they'd at least take a breath and think about what line they were crossing. But they didn't. Crystal Pines wasn't slowing down. They were doubling down. These people weren't just looking to mess with me anymore. They wanted to erase me. And they were getting bolder about it. The night after the barn stunt, someone cut the power line that ran from the main pole behind my shed. Clean slice. Took out the lights, the cameras, and my electric fence for the south pasture. Lucky I had a generator and a mean streak, because if they were trying to leave me in the dark, it wasn't going to work. I had backup plans for my backup plans. So I sat in the glow of old lanterns that night, blue curled up at my feet, flipping through a notepad full of names, dates, footage timestamps, deed copies, and county maps. I wasn't just gathering proof anymore, I was gathering ammo. The next morning I drove to the post office and picked up something that nearly made my jaw hit the floor. An official-looking envelope from a local bank. Inside was a foreclosure notice. At first I laughed, out loud. Because I don't have a mortgage. Never have. Bought my land outright, paid cash, signed every page myself. But according to this letter, Crystal Pines HOA had filed a claim that I owed them over $17,000 in delinquent community assessments, infrastructure usage fees, and property compliance violations. I had to sit down. It listed things like unauthorized equine units, which I assume means my horses, sunlight reflection off the barn roof, even a fine for something they called excessive fence shadow encroachment. I didn't know whether to scream or die laughing. It was so absurd, so over the top, that it would have been funny if they weren't trying to use it to steal my land. That was the last straw. Emma, my cousin and attorney, got a judge on an emergency call and laid it all out. Fake bills, fraudulent foreclosure, unapproved construction, sabotage, threats. The judge didn't hesitate. She issued a temporary freeze on all HOA actions and scheduled a full court hearing. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew they weren't done. People like that don't fold until they're forced. So while they were still running around in panic trying to rewrite the rules, I made a few quiet moves of my own. See, earlier in this mess, I'd had a conversation with a man named Ernest Walker, the original landowner who used to own the whole area before Crystal Pines swooped in with their development plans. We'd sat on his porch sipping tea, talking about the old days. He was sharp for his age. Said he still held a few surprise parcels, tiny strips that the developers overlooked. One ran under their community walking trail. One cut through the clubhouse parking lot. One sat right beneath their big, fancy HOA office building. And another, a narrow 6-foot wide path, ran across their entrance like a scar. I made him an offer. Quietly, politely, and he agreed. Within 48 hours, the deeds were filed, which meant technically the land under Crystal Pines headquarters didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to me, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. At sunrise the next morning, I walked right up to their glass front office building, slapped a wooden sign into the ground, and nailed a bright white eviction notice onto the front door. Notice of trespass. Cease operations immediately. Property owned by Mike Riggins. I didn't need a bullhorn or a crowd, just a hammer and a name. By lunch, the news had caught wind. I wasn't the one who called them, but someone did. Probably one of the HOA's own members. And just like that, everything Crystal Pines had tried to keep quiet was now very, very public. Emails flooded their inbox. The HOA's phone lines were jammed. Protesters stood outside holding signs. Let Mike in. This ain't your land. We back the ranch. Even local veterans came out to show support. Meanwhile, donations started pouring in to help cover legal fees, though I didn't need them. It was the message that mattered. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I was standing at the front of something bigger than a property dispute. This was about independence, about standing up when the little guy gets pushed. But Crystal Pines didn't go down without a last swing. That evening, someone dropped off another set of court papers. This time, they were claiming I was impeding essential community functions by restricting access to my own land. Said I was obstructing legally chartered operations. It was nonsense, thinly veiled desperation. Emma read through it and just shook her head. They're drowning, she said, and this is them clawing at anything they can reach. Still, we prepared. I stayed up that night, organizing everything, the drone footage, the camera recordings, maps, letters, timestamps, threats, fake bills, the broken power line, and now the fraudulent foreclosure. Everything. Then came the visit I never expected. Just past midnight, I heard someone walking near the gate. No engine, no truck, just footsteps on gravel. I stepped out with a flashlight and my shotgun slung low. And there, just outside the beam of light, stood a woman in a business suit, dust on her shoes, hair a little wild, hands up. It was Beatrice Langford. She looked tired, not angry, not smug, just tired. I need to talk, she said, alone. Against every instinct in my body, I listened. She stepped forward slowly and pulled a flash drive from her coat. This has everything, she whispered. Emails, memos, proof of the planned sabotage, the fake paperwork, the digging, all of it. I didn't sign up for this, and I'm done. She handed it to me and walked away. I stood there in the dark, holding the drive in my palm, heart thudding. This was it, the nail in their coffin. The next morning, I walked into court with Emma on one side and my pride on the other. Across the aisle sat the full HOA board. Brent, Beatrice, a few other faces I recognized from the mailers. Their table was stacked high with binders and photos, but none of it mattered. Because when Emma dropped that flash drive on the judge's desk and played the footage, showed the communications, presented the maps and the fraudulent signatures, it was like watching a dam break. The judge didn't even need a recess. She ruled in our favor on every count. Crystal Pines was fined, their board disbanded, their operations frozen, and several members were referred for criminal investigation. I didn't cheer. I didn't raise my fists. I just nodded and walked out the front doors into the sun with the same boots I wore when they tried to fence me in. The war was over, but I still had one final card to play. Remember that patch of land they tried to pave into a road? The one they thought would become their crown jewel north entrance? I bought that too, and I didn't just sit on it. I started building. Not a wall, not a gate, not a protest. I built a rodeo arena. Right there, right in the shadow of their tidy little sidewalks and trimmed lawns. I named it Freedom Arena. And every Saturday, the lights blaze, and the stands fill with families, kids with toy lassos, veterans grilling barbecue, country music pouring through the night air. The Crystal Pines residents? Some moved away, some complained, but most. They came to the cookouts, they danced, they laughed. They realized maybe the man they tried to fence out wasn't the enemy. And as for me, I sit back, blue by my side, beer in hand, and watch the arena lights shine on the land they tried to steal. Only now, they don't get to call the shots. Because the only key that ever mattered, the one that opens gates, breaks chains, and builds something better, that key's been in my pocket all along.